Good evening. Today is Tuesday, December 3rd, and this is a special meeting of the Cave Creek Unified School District. It is 6 p.m. Item 1.2, our Pledge Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 1.3, roll call. All members of the board are present. All members of the cabinet are present. Dr. Pletnick, Dr. Hendrickson, Dr. Jensen, and Mr. Dolezal. Item 1.4, formal adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Item 2.1, facilities focus group presentation, presented by Dr. Hendrickson, Mr. Dolezal, and Dr. Pletnick.
Good evening, members of the board, staff, families, and members of our community. I want to begin tonight by acknowledging the weight of the presentation we are about to have. The possibility of closing schools is one of the most difficult decisions a school district can face, and certainly the toughest of my 32 years in education. It is emotional, and it should be. It touches not only our facilities, but more importantly, the lives, memories, the futures of our staff, students, and families. To me, schools are not just buildings. They are the heart of our community and the foundation of lifelong learning. Tonight, as we present this topic and move forward together in the process, I ask that we approach it with both sensitivity and unity. I believe we all share a common purpose: to provide the best opportunities for every child in our district. Yet, we also know the realities that we face: financial constraints, changing enrollment patterns, increased attacks on public education, ESAs, and the need to ensure that every student has access to high-quality learning environments. These challenges require us to think critically and make decisions that, while painful, aim to serve our students' long-term interests. I understand that this process brings a range of emotions, from anger and frustration to grief and worry about the future. These feelings are valid, and we all experience them as humans in times of change. Tonight is not just about spreadsheets and enrollment numbers. It's about people. It's about children, educators, and families whose lives will be impacted by whatever decisions we make. I also want to emphasize at this time the importance of us coming together as a community. In moments like these, it is easy to point fingers or fall into division, but we must rise above that. The strength of our district has always been its people, and we will need that strength now more than ever. Let us remember that, even in disagreement, we are united by our care for our students and our shared commitment to their success. My hope is tonight that we can listen to the presentation with open hearts and minds, weigh all perspectives, and work together to make decisions that will help our district emerge stronger and more resilient. While we may not all agree on the outcome, we can choose to move forward in a way that reflects the values and dignity of this amazing community. Thank you, and I would now like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Hendrickson and Dr. Pletnick.
Thank you, Mr. Dolezal. President Busby, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity for us to present the findings from our facility focus group. I also want to thank our community for their engagement as well. It's important that you are hearing the message, you're hearing the background, the research, and also providing your input. And we'll talk about how throughout this process where opportunities for our families, our teachers, and our staff to be able to provide their input and ask questions as well. So this evening we'll go through lots of information. So this is a lengthy presentation that we hope is comprehensive and answers many questions you might have. We'll go through kind of the background research that the facility focus group conducted over the past 8 months, the data that was gathered from, that was shared with them, that we gathered from our end here at district office, that looked at enrollment, looked at cost savings, and then finally we will provide information on the recommendations from that focus group, and then kind of the next phase looking at future repurposing of our schools as well. So with the facility focus group, we kind of had two purposes and focus outcomes from this. Is number one, review district enrollment trends and other relevant data to make recommendations for efficient use of district buildings. Knowing that where our capacity is, knowing our current enrollment, we want to look at are we most efficiently using our buildings. And throughout this process, we met with a district demographer who's done several reports for us over the last decade at least. We looked at all those trends. We looked at our capacity of our buildings, the lifespan of our buildings as well, and then gathered information from our directors. And so kind of a breakdown of those meetings. Our first meeting was the demographer who presented the study, looked at what their district was 10 years ago and where the district is going based on the research that their company does, looking at everything from housing trends, from birth rates to the impact of vouchers, school competition, and whatnot. Our second meeting, we went into looking at the capacity of our buildings. So if we were to consolidate, do we have capacity at each site to move students from one site to another? And then what was the life cycle of those buildings? Because that's a factor of our buildings, some buildings older, and are those ones going to be more costly down the way? And finally, with work from Dr. Pletnick, what is the potential cost savings for this? And how much would we save if we close one site, multiple sites, and whatnot? And then from there, we started to begin to narrow down. The committee would run through various scenarios where they said, okay, if we identify school A, what would happen to those students? Does it make sense for them to move to this site? Why would we move them to this site? Why would this school be chosen as a potential school for closure over another school? And then finally, we kind of wrapped it up with putting together this presentation, looked at moving forward as far as if this were to be a vote by the governing board here in January, how are we going to support our students? How are we going to support our staff through this process? So really, we had two North Stars, we call them, that we used as our litmus test with every discussion we had, with decisions we made. Number one, what is best for all students, not only now, but what is best for students in the future? And then what will result in future financial stability for CCUSD? The committee was made up of a range of individuals, comprising of all of our elementary schools and our middle schools, both our teachers, community members, administrators, district administrators as well. And so we have several of our focus group members here tonight. So number one, I just want to thank you all publicly for the work you did for the past 8 months. It was emotional work. It was work where they knew they were potentially giving recommendations that were going to impact their fellow teachers, their fellow parents, their fellow community members. And I just have to point out, and it speaks to the testament of this community, just the care and empathy they had for one another, where you had individuals that were not going to potentially be impacted based on the recommendation, but still came with heart and compassion, knowing that their fellow coworker was going to be impacted and wanting to make sure that we had action steps in place if this were to go forward to support those members. So just a great group of individuals, so I just want to thank them. Just to give you a little bit of background history of the sites that we'll be discussing tonight, and then past closures as well. So Desert Sun Elementary has had a few moves over the years, but landed in 2000 at its current location, with Lone Mountain opening in 2002. 2010 was when Desert Arroyo Middle School closed. Desert Arroyo was looked at through this process because that was a way of seeing if you do close a school, how not to close a school. And that's one of the things that the facility management company that consulted with us provided information on the proper steps through that. Finally, Desert Sun Elementary was converted to Desert Sun Academy in 2010 as a way of rebranding to help support enrollment. In 2023, that was our last demographic study that was conducted, although we had done them every other year prior to that. It was the last demographic study that was conducted, and it did confirm previous studies that we are seeing a declining enrollment, and it was predicted kind of moving forward, and again, that trend continues. Then in 2023, the IBN, one of the discussions that took place and the recommendations that came out of IBN that was presented to the board was knowing that with the lack of overrides and bonds and the financial instability of the district, wanting the district to take a stronger look at how do we make better financial decisions with efficiencies of buildings. And so that was from 2023. And then finally with our focus group beginning in the spring of 2024 and continuing through end of November, beginning of December there. A little more just background narrative for you. As we look at past overrides and bonds history, as we all know, that's one thing that CCUSD has struggled with for many years, with our last bond being successfully passed back in 2014, our last override not coming since 2007. And so this is just another piece of the puzzle as we look at knowing that we cannot rely on this as a potential way to increase the money we bring in, to expand programs, to expand salaries. We know that this is not something we rely on. We have to take other measures. A little bit of our timeline here. So just to kind of give you a background and wrap up. So we talked about the 5 different meetings that we held beginning in May of this last school year, May of 2024. Brings us to December 3rd tonight, where we are presenting our findings from our research. Next week, we are going to be asking the governing board to take action to allow us to hold community forums to gather input from the schools that are impacted and the community as a whole, an opportunity to ask questions, give feedback, ask us to look into other things or other possibilities as well. And then finally, on January 28th, if the board does approve us moving forward, is when we would ask the board to take action based on the recommendations from the focus group. So beginning with that demographic study, and I'll kind of zoom in on it here. So that demographic study looked at actual enrollments from 2013 through the 23-24 school year when the research was conducted, and then an outward projection through 2033-2034. So if we look at just the actual enrollments, you see our individual schools there and their enrollments each year for the last 10 years. But if you look at that bottom line, going from 2,800 students back in the 2013-2014 school year to projected of just over 2,000 students in the 23-24 school year. So about a 30% reduction, so seeing about a 3% loss each year there. And then from that report, looking at what is the projection moving forward. And again, the full demographic study will be on our website, the website that will be dedicated to this focus group. They looked at, again, trends, birth rates, housing developments, and whatnot, with projection of our enrollment dropping from just under 1,900 students in the 24-25 school year, dropping to just over 1,500 students in the 2033-24 school year. And so we see these trends happening over and over again. As we have enrollments come over and over again, we continue to verify these trends as well. So that was the demographer's report. I'm going to give you actual numbers as of November 11th of this past year. So our projected from the first day of school was 1,880 students. And so that was the roll up from the previous school year, looking at what we project our kindergarten enrollment to be. So as of November 11th, though, we are at 1,840 students. And so you see 2 of our schools, Black Mountain and Horseshoe Trails, actually beat those predictions, while our other 3 schools, Desert Willows, Desert Sun, and Lone Mountain, were lower than projected. So we were about 40 students lower than what we projected we started the school year with. As far as where our students were coming, so this was as of the 23-24 school year. I'm going to kind of explain this chart a little bit to you because it looks a little hard to read at first. So I'm going to start with the top line, looking at Black Mountain. So the green box of Black Mountain, that means 294 students live in Black Mountain's boundaries and attend Black Mountain. But Black Mountain has more than 294 students. So I look at the next column over, 21 students attend there from attendance area 2, which will be Desert Willow. 19 students attend from area 3, Desert Sun. 72 from Lone Mountain, and then 20 from Horseshoe Trails. And then Black Mountain does capture 71 students who are true open enrollments from outside the district. So I want you all to pay attention to the outside of the district, because that was one of the important factors that we looked at, is what schools were bringing in kids from neighboring districts. And so Black Mountain bringing in 71, Desert Willow bringing in 84, Black Mountain 71, Desert Willow 84, Desert Sun 25, Lone Mountain 39, and then Horseshoe Trails 95. And then finally moving to that last column there, kind of what is the differential based on the kids that live within those zones, that attend, attracting kids from outside of the zones. You see that Black Mountain, Desert Willow, and Horseshoe Trails do have a high difference in the kids that live within there, how many kids actually attend that school. Desert Sun actually loses kids based on the number of kids that live there or what they bring in. And then Lone Mountain almost about breaks even between how many kids they lose out, how many kids that come in there. So again, these were all factors that were taken into consideration as we looked at potential sites that would be identified here this evening. From that demography report, some of the other major findings, the total enrollment population, the ratio, we've seen that continuing to drop from 80 to 60% over the last 2 decades, so roughly a 1% each year. The service rate of our district, so number of school-age children that we actually service, is just over 50%. Although that seems very low, that's pretty close on par with a lot of districts, and that's as a result of school choice and schools competition. And then the amount of residential development potential in our area is very small. Where we do see residential development, we see large homes, we see homes that are going to be pricier homes, which do not bring in families with younger children. So we know there's an impact. And then obviously we've talked about this at several meetings, the continued expansion of ESAs, otherwise known as vouchers, having a major impact specifically in Cave Creek and at a higher rate than surrounding districts around us. So if we look at the impact of our ESAs, I'll kind of explain how we read these bars here. So the numbers on the bottom refer to the quarter and of the school year. So that first bar is the second quarter of the 2021 school year. So we're saying less than 100 students were taking part in vouchers. If we move down the line where we see that first big jump in the first quarter of the 2023 school year, that's when we saw the expansion of the vouchers, where we significantly increased to 450 students taking vouchers. As those continue to expand, the fourth quarter of the 2023 school year, we saw another significant drop. And as of the third quarter of last year, just under 1,000 students, or roughly 1,000 students that live within Cave Creek boundaries take advantage of vouchers. The hard part about those reports that Dr. Pletnick does receive is that although we know the number of students, we don't necessarily know who those students are. So we cannot identify these were students that never were in our schools but now are taking advantage of these vouchers, or students that were in our schools that are now using these vouchers to seek private education, seek homeschooling options, things like that. But we do know that this is a trend that has significantly impacted us. So using all that data from the demographer, we also looked at other factors. And so these are all things and all pieces of research that we pulled, information we provided the focus group to take into consideration. Number one, to identify, is there a need to close schools? And then if so, how do we identify based on various factors? So current, projected, and open enrollment all being factors. Location is a big piece of the puzzle here. Is it a school that sits on the boundary to another school district where we are potentially gaining kids? But if that school closes, will we lose kids to that neighboring district? So that's a major factor. What sort of specialty programs do you have at those schools? And can those specialty programs be replicated or moved to another site? Does attendance consolidation help with efficiency? Free and reduced lunch numbers, what sort of impact would those have? Although it's a small number for us, we wanted to make sure we looked at that. If we were going to rezone, we knew it was important that we keep our community, our neighborhoods together. We know that all of our schools are neighborhood schools, and we didn't want to just simply draw a line down a street potentially that said this is where a split would occur. We wanted to make sure that we were considering our special education programs, specifically our PALS and our PATH, and making sure that we were setting those students and those educators up for success. And then if students were to be moved from another site, what is the distance they would have to travel? How many buses would we need? How long would they be on the bus? All those things were taken into consideration. And then building conditions. Are certain sites going to be more costly in the future as opposed to other sites? And then lastly, as we started kind of working through those scenarios, making sure with whatever scenarios we looked at, do we have balanced school enrollment? Were these economically viable and responsible? Were they going to bring in some cost savings? What sort of revenue could we bring in as a result of repurposing? What are their future maintenance needs? And then also the school facility department's coverage of those sites. So those numbers up there refer to kind of how the school was built was going to determine how the school is repaired. So as we look at Black Mountain, Desert Willow, and Desert Sun, all those schools are 100% covered by the school facilities division. So a roof goes out, we need new carpet, paint, 100% of that would be covered by the school facilities division, whereas Horseshoe Trails and Lone Mountain at 68 and 37% respectively. So again, all pieces that we had to look at. But really, as we continue to wind down, we looked at kind of four major things. I talked about geographic location. That was a big factor that we had to consider. Where is that school located within the district and within neighboring districts? Open enrollment, is that a school that is attracting students from outside? That helps our kind of bottom line, if you will. Current and future enrollment, again, making sure our recommendation, does this what we call right size our district? Does this put us into a place where we are having the most efficient use of our buildings and not spreading our kind of use of resources out too far? And then finally, our specialty programs, making sure that those would be sustainable, if not opportunities to expand our specialty programs here in the future. So now, based on all of that, I want to kind of get into our recommendations. So knowing that our district is at a crossroads because we are experiencing declining enrollment, and this has led to inefficiencies in how we use our human and financial resources, which makes maintaining the current number of schools no longer sustainable. Therefore, we have made the difficult decision to recommend the closure of 2 schools to align resources more effectively in order to ensure long-term success of students and staff. So these will be the following recommendations for the 25-26 school year. That was unanimous from our focus group. Number 1, Black Mountain would remain but move to a K-5 school. Dams, no longer seeing a need for that, submitting that for demolition to the school facilities division. DSA is going to be recommended for closing and rezoning to Horseshoe Trails. Desert Willow remains as a K-5 school, again, moving our 6th graders. Lone Mountain closing and rezoning that site between Black Mountain and Desert Willow. Horseshoe Trails remaining as a K-5 school, and then returning our 6th graders to Sonoran Trails Middle School. So I want to kind of go into each one of those recommendations. But before I do, kind of give you a summary of all the factors that we looked at. Again, this kind of shows geography, specialty programs. Dr. Pletnick will get in the figures here a little bit later, but per pupil expenditure. When you have smaller schools and you still have overhead that you must cover, you're going to have a higher per pupil expenditure, as you see with Desert Sun there. Open enrollment, current enrollment, and then the repair cost. And then building capacity. So with our building capacity study, we looked at how many seats are essentially available at each site. And so you see here on this spreadsheet, you see capacity, and then you see capacity at 80%. The reason we do capacity at 80% is not every classroom is used 100% of the time during the school day. When a teacher is on prep, there's no students in that classroom. Theoretically, that time could be used to put other kids in that classroom. You often see this at the junior high and the high school, where you have traveling teachers that will use that classroom different periods of the day. So we kind of use that 80% of the day that classroom is used. So based on that, with the 23 and the 24 and 24-25 school year, you see that each one of our sites is below capacity, to where you have 274 below at Black Mountain, 589 open seats, if you will, at Desert Sun, 396 at Desert Willow, 382 at Horseshoe Trails, and 452 at Lone Mountain. So again, knowing that we do have the capacity if we were to consolidate schools. So the rationale behind the closure of Desert Sun Academy and moving those students to Horseshoe Trails is, number one, DSA being our smallest school with a current enrollment of just 199 students. And as of that 23-24, where we looked at where our students landed and where they came from, a net loss of students of 81 students. And a school that has the smallest enrollment from outside of the school district at just 25. So that, combined with the other factors, is why Desert Sun is being recommended. In moving those students over to Horseshoe Trails, so these numbers are based off of if all of those students that are currently at Desert Sun actually go to Horseshoe Trails and not choose to open and enroll at another site or leave the district. This is what we could predict, and again, we don't lose any students. This is what we could predict what those class sizes and classrooms would look like. And so as you see across the grid there, you see each grade level, the number of students combining those schools. Also knowing that there's currently students at Lone Mountain that live within the Desert Sun Academy boundary. Those students would be rezoned for Horseshoe Trails. Again, they will have the option to choose a different site if they choose to do so. So that would put Horseshoe Trails at a capacity or at an enrollment projection of 513 students. And then you see at the bottom there our resource projection. This is only K4 because we don't know when they become first through fifth graders next school year. We simply don't know how many identified kindergartners there would be, but starting off the year at 39 students. Our second recommendation is closure of Lone Mountain Elementary School. Those students would be rezoned between Black Mountain and Desert Willow. The reason that that would be a split is simply because of the number of students at that site, and then making sure all three of our elementary schools that are remaining are pretty close in size. So our rationale that we have is Lone Mountain is centrally located. It does make it very ideal for a possible central district repurposing. It does have low outside enrollment, again, because of what we assume is the location of that site. It does have low outside enrollment of just 26 students. And should that site need future repairs, it is going to be the highest cost for the district because only 37% of that would be covered by the school's facilities division. Now, if we do maintain that building and something were to happen, we would hope that the additional revenue gained would help offset those costs there. But again, something that we had to take into consideration. As far as where that Lone Mountain current boundaries would be split, in having Vicki from our IT department runs all of our numbers with our power schools, there is a pretty even split that just happens to work out straight down Cave Creek Road. And so based on that, you have roughly 61 students in K4 currently west of Cave Creek Road, and then 72 students K4 east of Cave Creek Road. And so splitting that is a pretty close number. When I looked at what grade levels those students are, it's pretty spread out amongst that K5 realm, if you will. And again, so it just kind of makes it a very natural split where you're not splitting up neighborhoods in the process. So that would impact Desert Willow Elementary in the following way. This one chart's a little different here. Obviously, we have the Spanish immersion program at Desert Willow. And so at the top, you have these numbers for students who are going to be in the English side, we're assuming, if they maintain that from Lone Mountain, or current students in third and fourth and I believe fifth grade that are choosing the English side currently at Lone Mountain, at Desert Willow. And then on the bottom half of that, you see where our Spanish immersion numbers would be. That would put the total enrollment at Desert Willow, again, if every student moves there and doesn't leave the district, at 384, and then kind of our resource numbers that we could project. And then finally, the impact to Black Mountain. Black Mountain, again, our numbers across the board, what our student count would be at each grade level, and then the number of teachers for each grade level there. Black Mountain would have an enrollment of at 478 students, and then a resource enrollment of 27 students. And then lastly, moving our 6th grade to Sonoran Trails. I'll be honest, when we originally began our committee work, really was just looking at the elementary schools, but this is something that came out from the group that said, hey, if we're making these changes, we think this would be a really good thing for our students. And so, again, in the past, 6th grade was at Sonoran Trails. As we reconfigure, they moved to the elementary sites. So one big thing is that there additional time for student academic and social development in those middle school years. We know it's a quick 2 years, and we know that it's a fun 2 years as a parent of two girls that just left junior high. It's a fun 2 years. So we think it's a great opportunity for them to have that social development. It is a more appropriate grade span with a K-5 and a 6-8. There is the potential for increased academic offerings for 6th grade students. Currently, with our elementary sites being so small, those 6th grade students only get art, music, and PE for the most part every year for 7 years. This will expand those opportunities. Increase for extracurricular offerings that we have through clubs and sports. Potential increase for family involvement. And this is something I've heard Mr. Dolezal say, but our parents talked a lot about, is that junior high is so fast, they're not sure how to get involved, where to get involved, but knowing that their students are there for a longer period of time, we do see that there is potential with our PTOs that there's a greater investment. And then kind of from the HR perspective, 6th grade is the hardest grade level to hire teachers at for a couple reasons. You either have a teacher that really likes the content and is really comfortable with the content at 6th grade, but they only want to teach that content. Fortunately, 6th grade teachers have to teach multiple content areas. Or you have teachers that like the elementary, but they don't want those older kids. They're not comfortable with the content, but they want to stay at the elementary. And so that is always the hardest one to hire for. And so I do believe that moving them to a 6th grade where they're going to be departmentalized or possibly have dyads or however the configuration, we're going to be able to attract teachers that like that content area, want to teach that single subject, want to teach that grade level as well. And then the breakdown of numbers of our students at each grade level there at Sonoran Trails, with a total of enrollment of 951 students. And then lastly, currently our PALS program, that's a self-contained K-6 program, is housed at Lone Mountain. We would be looking to move those students to Horseshoe Trails. A couple reasons for that. This provides multiple classrooms for mainstreaming for peer role models, buddy classroom, mentor classrooms as well. And then potential opportunity for interactions with horsemanship program at Horseshoe Trails, which we think would be a great addition for those students, that student population. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Pletnick, who will talk the dollars.
President Busby, governing board members. I'll be speaking about the financial implications, but before we go on, I once again want to acknowledge the human aspect of this decision. I have the job of quantifying, which can lack the human side, so it's sometimes difficult to talk the numbers and not take in consideration all of those pieces and all the factors that Dr. Hendrickson has spoken about. Also, I want you to please remember to look at this as a district and not just individual school data. We are making a decision for the benefit of the district. So there will be a lot of individual school numbers up there, some to take in consideration, but we also do have to focus on the overall implication for our elementary side of the school district. The other piece I want to reinforce is the closure rationale. With talking financials, we still have to remember that is just a piece of why the recommendations are made. So the financial aspects have to be taken in consideration with the rest of the rationale that was provided earlier. The financial information will require an explanation of the school finance terms and the terms used under the uniform system of financial records that public schools operate under. As you know, the financial system in a school setting is not quite as easy as it is in a private school setting or in the public. So I will be doing a breakdown of some of the explanation. Now, the first piece that I'm going to go over are terms which we refer to as functions. And we speak about these in costs as well as cost savings. You may remember I spoke about functions during the annual financial report presentation, but I'm going to go ahead and cover these again with you. I will be defining the costs associated with these functions if a school does close. Now, there are assumptions that are made. Cost savings assumptions have to be made in the situations. The assumptions we're using are consistent and aligned with the assumptions made by multiple other school districts who are or who have experienced what we are currently experiencing discussing school closures, and this does include Paradise Valley. Also, you will see a percentage of student loss associated with closing a school, which we do put at 12.5%. And again, I'll be discussing that in further detail, but this is, again, consistent with the numbers other districts have used. These are conservative numbers, so we may not experience 12.5% loss, but we definitely want to be on the conservative side when looking at these numbers. Also, when we look at the cost savings, and we'll discuss, for example, function 1000, 14%, we're assuming we'll save 14%. We actually may save more than 14%, or it could be less than. But again, it's assumption being made. I will tell you other districts who have gone conservatively have actually experienced greater cost savings. Now, each function I'm going to be discussing and the cost savings associated with this, it's assuming we're increasing efficiency. So when we look at function 1000, which is instruction, this includes activities dealing directly with the interaction between students and teachers. Most of this is going to be salaries that are involved in it. So when we look at this function and we assume savings, if we close a school, we're going to assume we're going to save 14% at that school. Now, why would it only be 14% if we're closing a school? Well, we're moving those students to other schools. Therefore, we would need teachers at the other schools. So that's why we would only assume a 14% loss, or savings, I'm sorry. Function 2100 is your student support services. Again, 14% savings in this, but what this is activities designed to assess and improve students' well-being and to supplement the teaching process. So this is an area where attendance clerks can fall in, or those providing attendance services, I should say, guidance services, health services, speech pathologists, and our OT and PTs can fall into this category. Now we have function 2200, which is instructional support. Again, 14% savings would be assumed here. And these are activities associated with this assisting the instructional staff with content and the process of providing learning experiences for students. So this would be curriculum development, instructional staff trainings. If we have library and media services are thrown into those, also student assessments. Function 2400 is titled School Administration. Now, this is where we would see our biggest savings, which is 95%. Now, this is activities concerned with the overall administrative responsibility for a school. The first thing people are going to think of are the principals at the school. That is only part of that cost. So this would include your school administration as your principals, but also include savings from department chairs, team leads, and paying department chairs, team leads. It also includes your front office staff, and it also includes supplies and activities used for the school within this function. Now, function 2600, which is maintenance of the plant. This is 70% savings. What this is the actual physical upkeep of the building when we keep it open, comfortable, and safe for use. It also considers keeping the grounds, the buildings, and all of the equipment within that building. All right, the current slide breaks down the expenditure at each elementary level for all funding sources. Now, this includes our maintenance and operation budget, but also additional funds such as grant funding. Now, this was, again, based upon our fiscal year 24. So please remember a couple of things when we look at additional fundings. Our Title I funding was reduced last year. In addition, there was the expiration of ESSER funding, so the COVID funding. So that is no longer there. Now, the district has been using less secure funding, such as grants and donations, to close the gaps in the needs of our schools. This slide is to demonstrate the varying cost per student in each school. Please note the enrollment and the cost per students. All we're doing is simply taking the expenditures and dividing it by the enrollment to give us that cost per student. As you can see, our costs per school vary, but specific schools such as DSA have a greater cost per students than others. And this is certainly due to economy of scale. Now, the next slides will go into further breakdowns of costs and funding, as, again, the funding isn't just based upon straight enrollment at the school, and we're going to talk about our ADM funding in the next slides. Also, please remember, all expenditures are based off the fiscal year 24 expenditures. We're using this because the fiscal year 24 expenditures are known, because our district annual financial report is finalized, and we are not using estimates of costs at that point. So we're using actual costs from that fiscal year of 24. And if you look at our maintenance operations spending over the past 3 years, it has been very consistent. Okay, now the next slide requires an explanation of student funding. And when we look at this, we are looking at our enrollment versus our weighted average daily membership. Now, we cannot simply say that a flat amount is received for students. If you notice, the base level is $5,013. $5,013 is what the state states we can receive per student. But the state funding formula is actually a weighted formula. Okay, this means that we have to take multiple items into consideration. The formula includes student grade level and individual needs as well. So when we look at this, we look at their average daily membership. How long have we had them in their first 100 days? What percentage? If it's 100%, then it would be the full $5,013. If it's only half of that, it would be half of that number. But then on top of that, what we need to do is we have a multiplier, which is if they have individual needs, if they're a K-3 student, there's a weighted average that is brought to those students, and we're going to be covering that. Now, I want to draw your attention to the first line, which is Black Mountain. If we look at the previous slide, we see Black Mountain's enrollment is 498 students. But when we look at our weighted ADM, we're seeing Black Mountain is 614.0028 students. Now, this is because these students are weighted for various factors such as special education and or reading. So even though there's 498 students there, we're actually receiving funding for 614 students at that site. So the other thing to remember is if a student does have a weighting, meaning they have a special need and they do move schools, that weighting follows them from site to site to site. Okay, so looking at Black Mountain, we do take the weighted average daily membership and multiply it by the base level, which is the $5,013. That provides us the funding per student. Now, in our district, we get a little extra, which is Teacher Experience Index. And so what this means is our average teacher experience is higher than average. Normally 1.0 is used for the baseline of that. And as you can see, we're at 1.0126. Now, that doesn't mean our teachers have 0.0126 more experience. It is a formula that they use to calculate the more experience your teachers have, the higher that formula is, the higher the multiplier is. And so as you can see, we, again, 1.0126, meaning we have an higher than average experience on our teaching staff. Now, our weighted ADM times the TEI then gives us our adjusted base level funding. So when we take in consideration the weighted ADM, the base level, then the TEI, that's the amount per school we're actually receiving per our last, again, our November statements. Now, if we look at an example would be going back. Let's compare two schools and let's look at Horseshoe Trails at 423 students and we look at Lone Mountain at 376 students. When we go back, what we can see is we're receiving a weighted ADM of 512 at each site, which means we're actually receiving more money based upon just actual student enrollments at Lone Mountain than we are at Horseshoe Trails. Now, what that means is, and if we look at the breakdown of it, we do have our special education program at Lone Mountain, which would be why we would be receiving that extra money. But that also can be used to explain if there is extra costs associated, why the M&O expenditures would be higher at that site. And so that's what we're going to move into next. Is this slide examines the M&O expenditures for each school. We're looking at M&O as M&O is directly impacted to our student enrollments. It's a little bit different than other funding sources like our grants and donations. All right, grants and donations could be based upon individual student need. It also, again, donations could be who donates to what facility. But again, enrollment is directly tied to that M&O. As you can see, after the funding for weighted ADM and expenditures, we are just under $70,000 positive as a district for our elementary level. Now, you may say $70,000, okay, we're in the positive. But again, going back to that AFR presentation that I did, if you remember, this M&O and this ADM doesn't just fund those individual schools. It has to fund all district processes. And again, here's the breakdown from the AFR of all the various processes and where our M&O money is spent. So $70,000 spreading it outside does not go a long way. Okay, when we take in consideration just our facility cost alone, if you think of the electric bill at your house and then what the electric bill must be at our facilities, that $70,000 doesn't put us in a very good position. All right, now you'll see savings based upon school closures. When we're looking at these savings, we need to move back to the functions that I spoke about earlier. This table shows the savings based upon the fiscal year 24 expenditures. So if you remember the 1,000, the instruction, we would save 14%. So if we took the little over $1.6 million spent at Lone Mountain on 1,000 M&O, we would be saving about $225,000 at that school. So you can go down that chart and see based upon those percentages what we would be saving at each school. And you can see the savings at Lone Mountain would be about $650,000. And at DSA, it would be about $590,000. And remember, these are assumptions that we are making. So the savings could vary off of this. And again, this is based upon the best numbers that we have with our expenditures, but also our current enrollment that we have. Now, the second side we want to look at is also the student loss portion. As I mentioned, we're projecting a 12.5% student loss. We can see after the savings and loss, our M&O projections will be at $768,000, almost $769,000. Now, let's look at this from a larger perspective now. Currently, you see on the first line where we're currently at a total of nearly $70,000 after our adjusted base level funding and our M&O expenditures. With the two closures, it would have that benefit of that $769,000, and we would be at $839,000 in the positive. Now, the other piece I want to highlight is the cost of doing nothing at the elementary level. If we go back to the demographer's numbers, the demographer projected a 1% enrollment decline between this school year and next. As we saw the projections for this current school year, they were off. We're actually experiencing a 5% decline. In the past 2 to 3 years, we've seen this percentage decline or a little higher. Now, the demographer projected a 1% decline, so I'm going to use the 1% decline in our numbers. So if we have a 1% decline on that final line in our weighted ADM, you can see by doing nothing, we will move from that $70,000 positive at our elementary level to now we're in the negative territory. So now we're at near negative $46,000 if we choose to do nothing. Now, unfortunately, one-time solutions and short-term solutions have been tried, and they have been tried in the district for many years. But what we're realizing is it's not enough to offset the increased operational costs and the decreased enrollment. Again, if we look at that 1% number and we're actually experiencing more of a 5% decline, multiply that $45,000 by 5. And now all of a sudden that negative number is much more impactful on our bottom line.
All right, so knowing that as a focus group and as a cabinet, we'll be making a recommendation for the closures of 2 sites. We know that it's not simply about closing a school and moving students and families. We know that there's that major emotional side to it. And as a focus group, we spend a lot of time talking about what are the needs of those families and those students and that staff if this were to go through, and how do we support them in this process, because we know it is physically challenging. Simply as a teacher having to move your stuff, it's emotionally challenging. You'll be moving away from some coworkers, maybe moving with other coworkers, and the same with students and friends. And so we are going to make sure that if this does go through, that we're taking very specific steps to mitigate this process. But also I want to kind of talk about the benefits that we see kind of from the human side there. So as far as mitigation, one of the things that we will be implementing is provide priority open enrollment to all students. Just because you're now rezoned to Horseshoe Trails, let's say, but all your friends decide to go to Black Mountain, we want to make sure that we're providing a window of time where we tell those families, if you choose to apply for open enrollment, you'll be receiving open enrollment to that site. And so we will make sure that we advertise that and honor that. Again, with our ESS students that are going to be making that transition, those are our vulnerable populations. We want to make sure that we're having transition meeting plans established. We're providing schools tours for those families, and also making sure we're training the staff who will be receiving the general education staff at that receiving school, so that they have the skills and the knowledge to work with those students. One of the things Dr. Jensen has already had conversations with all elementary principals is providing opportunities for school tours and visits for receiving schools, so our students are able to get a feel for the school that they're going to be rezoned for. So it kind of takes some of that anxiety out of the air for them. Providing very night events, scheduled events for families to become ingrained in the school culture, whether that be a school bingo night that we're hosting that's an opportunity for these 2 schools to come over, or spring carnivals, things like that. And obviously, we talked about not splitting current neighborhoods. We do want to, your neighbor right next door across the street from you that you've grown up with, that you go to school with, obviously go into a different school than you. Making sure that we have opportunities for integration of 6th grade students at Snoring Trails. That's a little bit of anxiety for parents there. All of a sudden their kiddos you had one more year in elementary, now we're going to middle school, but making sure that we have a great way to integrate those students. Our 5th grade students that are transitioning, that we're looking forward to that 6th grade promotion, making sure we're celebrating and honoring them as they will potentially be leaving their school. The 6th grade traditions that are in place, whether it be going to science camp or different activities, making sure we find ways to ingrain those into their middle school years and experiences. One of the things we are going to begin exploring is options for 6th grade students for after-school care through our ECS programs. That was one of the things that the focus group mentioned. I will say from my understanding of past knowledge, not many families take advantage of after-school care in 6th grade. They take advantage of clubs, sports, and activities but that's something that we may want to provide. And then the Jump Start program that is currently offered to 6th graders that are incoming 7th graders, making sure we're offering those opportunities for our incoming 6th graders to get up to speed and get prepared for their middle school years. And then some of the benefits that we identified as a group, again, going back to that economy of scale, unfortunately at some schools we currently have combo classes where it's not fiscally responsible to have a single teacher with 10 kids, where we have to combine classrooms, and that's hard on the teacher, and it's also hard on the students as well. So there is a benefit that this does reduce the need for combo classes. does increase our peer groups. At some of our sites, you may be with those same kids in the same classroom for 7 straight years. And those are the only friends that you have in that grade level. And so by, again, expanding to 3 classrooms in that grade level, you're expanding your peer groups. This will allow us, with the kind of better financial stability, to maintain and increase program offerings with consolidation of populations. Increases access and flexibility to various services. For instance, currently we have 3 school counselors for 5 elementary sites. That's based on our current enrollment and our financial outlook right now. This will allow us to have full-time counselors at each site. We wouldn't have OTs, PTs, speech that have to travel throughout the day to multiple sites, to where the kid could be pulled out in the morning when it's a non-academic time, but right now they're being pulled out in the afternoon during an academic time. This reduces that. And then again, we talked about the additional opportunities for 6th grade students. As far as action steps we want to take to mitigate impact to staff, one of the things that we will be implementing for my department is surveying our staff to gather interest in the choice of school and grade level. We want them to have a say and an input if they have to be moved to another school. Providing them school tours, letting them get a feel for the culture at each of those schools. Although we have 5 amazing principals at elementary, they are all unique. They have different philosophies, different programs, different focus. And so we want those teachers to have an opportunity, and those support staff to have an opportunity to kind of find the right fit as they kind of share with where they're interested in going. Knowing that this is a burden on our staff that are going to be moving, looking at ways to provide compensation over the summer, if that's paying them up to 20 hours to break down their classroom, put their classroom back together. One of the things, again, from this amazing group that came out was similar to a Love Your Schools Day that we've done at our campuses, rallying our students and rallying teachers and support staff from other sites to help our teachers pack and move their stuff. And that's one of the things that several of them have already spoken about and wanting to step up and assist. And then finally, having one-on-one meetings with impacted individuals, making myself available. I already kind of have my calendar open for February to spend time at the impacted sites, to sit there, to listen, to hear their concerns, find ways that we can find that right fit, and then support them through this process. And kind of our identified benefits that from our group is, again, similar to the students, there is going to be a reduction of combo classes. And so the teachers that have to prepare for 2 grade levels for each subject in those grade levels, that's a taxing work for them. And so we'll see a reduction in that. More opportunities to collaborate with teammates. When you have 3 first grade teachers, one teacher can plan for math, one teacher can plan for ELA, one teacher can do social studies and science, as opposed to the single teacher simply having to do it all by themselves every single day, but just kind of a greater collaboration at these sites. With larger cohorts of students, it does allow for more balanced classrooms. I'm not saying larger class sizes, but more kids in the grade level allows you to spread those kids out, balance, abilities within each classroom, moving behaviors around, kids that can't be together. If you only have one classroom for that grade level, all those kids are together. This allows us to spread them apart. And then potential salary increases with cost-saving reduction and increased revenue streams would be a benefit to our staff members. So with that, we got lots of work still to do ahead. Some of the work is kind of already starting in the background as we kind of prepare for this potential. Obviously, we're going to ask for the governing board to have the community, a vote to allow us to have community forums at our next governing board meeting on the 10th. Continue that special education review, identifying those students. Continue to develop transportation routes to making sure we're communicating out to families as early as possible. Providing notices to our community with those forums. If there were to be a closure, making sure we're communicating to those families. As I mentioned before, the decision we will be bringing to the governing board on the 28th. Already have some dates kind of on the book for school tours and visits to receiving schools should the governing board take action. Obviously, human resources meeting, communicating the transfer process to our sites, conducting transition plans and tours, welcoming events for students and staff, advertising our open enrollments. There will be a page on our district website that will be providing all of this research, this presentation, the agendas from all the exploratory research meetings from our focus group, demography report, all of that will be going on our website either live tonight or early tomorrow morning. So again, not only is it the information here, but our community can read kind of all the data that went into this. And then savings analysis review in December in 2025. Again, as Dr. Pletnick said, we're not sure of the actualized savings until the kids show up. We know where they are, but then doing an analysis of what was the actual savings there. I do want to provide a reminder of future dates once again. So December 10th is when we were asked the board to approve us holding community forums. That will be an opportunity for our public to come to the dais and provide their comments. January 8th, we are looking to hold a community forum at DSA for both public comments and questions, kind of a more of an interactive process there, similar on January 9th at Lone Mountain. January 13th, we will hold a public forum, and so that's the legally required meeting to provide notice to the community of a potential closing that will occur on January 13th at the Fine Arts Center, and then asking for board action on January 28th. Again, another opportunity for the public to provide their comments. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Dolezal.
Thank you, Dr. Hendrickson and Dr. Pletnick. I would like to point out at this time that this is just phase one of a two-phase plan. After the efficiency and cost savings just presented, phase two will include the formation of a new committee composed of parents, staff, and community members. This committee's focus will be on repurposing district facilities to explore and recommend additional cost savings possibilities and increasing revenue streams for the district in order to continue to set up CCUSD for success moving forward to the future. Again, I know that was just reviewed. I want to take one more time just to be sure we're clear on the timeline that everybody has to engage with both the governing board and district administration. Tonight's special meeting is solely focused on presenting the work and recommendations of the facility focus group. The next step in the process will occur at our regularly scheduled business meeting, December 10th, which will include that call to the public. At the meeting, the board will be asked to take action on moving forward with the required public forums regarding possible school closures and changing boundaries. This is not a final decision on school closures and boundary adjustments. The board's action would only allow public forums to take place in order to answer questions and listen to the voices in our community. As stated, those forums would be Wednesday, January 8th at 6 p.m. at Desert Sun, Thursday, January 9th at 6 p.m. at Lone Mountain, and Monday, January 13th at 6 p.m. at the Fine Arts Center. And again, lastly, on the 28th at the business meeting, the board will again hear public comments, and after considering community feedback, whether shared during forums, via email, through phone calls, or in person, administration will bring a final recommendation asking the board to take action regarding school closures and boundary adjustments for the 25-26 school year. Before I conclude, I would like to express my appreciation to the facilities focus group. You were tasked with an incredibly challenging and emotional responsibility, and you approached it with professionalism, dignity, and grace. Your dedication to this work has been invaluable, and I thank you wholeheartedly for your efforts. With that, we would be happy to answer any questions the board may have at this time.
First of all, thank you to everybody who was involved in the committee and putting together this presentation. There is an abundance of information, and I know that it took a great deal of time. I know talking about the possibility of closing a school is very emotional, and it's not something that anybody on this dais or anybody in the district, for that matter, takes lightly. You know, our focus is solely about the health and well-being of our district and what's best for our students. And I really appreciate the work that everybody did, because I think it's very apparent you stayed true to that focus. With that, I have two questions. When there was a couple of slides where you were showing ratios in the schools, how it would change. Why is it in third grade it's a higher ratio than in K through 2 and after third grade.
President Busby, so we do have set ratios from governing board, and so I want to say our target is 26 in kindergarten, 28 in first, second, and then I think our target is 30 and above. But a lot of those numbers are just based on the cohorts of students that are at that grade level, the number of students that are there currently. We have some grade levels that are larger bubbles than others, and so then we just kind of divide that within the range that is approved by the governing board.
Okay.
No.
My other question, you've been very thorough with providing information on how and where we would be saving money. Even if in phase 2 there are opportunities to utilize 1 or 2 buildings, there's still a maintenance expense. And Desert Arroyo is a perfect example of an expense. How has that ongoing maintenance been taken into account?
Yeah, and that's why we see the 70% cost savings, and there's still that 30%. So when you close down a school, you would set the HVAC system, say, to 85 degrees, I believe is the number, in order to prevent the building from breaking down. Desert Arroyo is the perfect example of what not to do, and it is definitely the big example in the state of not how to close down a school. And again, you saw in our recommendations with Desert Arroyo that it was to send to SFD for potential demolition, again, to get on that list for that, just because to get that school up and running again. And Mr. Santina, who is our director of maintenance, would be able to give you the exact number, but it's something in the just for the HVAC systems in each one of the buildings, $400,000 per building to get up and running again. And we are past the point of, with broken pipes, broken walls to bring that building back. So, yes, that is taking consideration, again, that 70% instead of 100% savings moving forward.
Okay. And just a follow-up to that, if we're approved to have dams flattened, will we incur any cost to that?
That is, again, with SFD, what we're looking at is them covering that cost, because that building would be 100% covered by SFD. So in that, what I can tell you, the cost for demolition, again, we'd be working with them to cover that cost. But then I think it also refers to phase 2, and what Mr. Dolezal spoke about phase 2. We have this valuable property, and we want to create revenue streams. The game has changed in public education. There's no doubt about that. The ESA game is changed in public education, which has decreased our enrollment. And we're having to find creative ways now to deal with the fact that we're servicing 52% of our students, while there's over 1,000 students in our zip codes that are receiving ESA dollars. So how can we either recapture those ESA dollars in some way, shape, or form, or how can we create revenue streams with the property we have? So during phase 2, that's an important piece, because, again, when we want to put ourselves in a good financial position, yes, the cost-cutting measures are one piece, but what we need is something that we can sustain, and that revenue stream, knowing that we're going to see a decrease in enrollment moving forward, based upon demographer numbers and based upon statistically what we've seen. We need to utilize these properties in an efficient manner to either, number one, cut our costs, such as you know, I spoke about special education, and we spent $700,000 just on contractors. That's not even the 1.5 million ish that we're spending on just tuition and sending kids to private placement schools. So what are creative ways we can cut costs in those areas? What are creative ways we can make our facilities more efficient? What are ways we can take our facility usage, our rental fees, and renting our facilities at a more efficient way to bring in more money? So it's a combination of things.
Thank you.
And President Busby, if I could, you brought up a good point with that there is still a cost maintaining the building, and that's important. And I also want the community to know that, we don't want these buildings until they're reused to become eyesores within the community. So making sure we're still maintaining the outside of the facilities, making sure lights are still on, because when you close, when it's dark and there's chain fences, it attracts, possibly people that are going to have fun in those buildings. And so we want to make sure that we do not have eyesores in our community. So that would be an important thing to upkeep.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I got a few questions, and I think I'll probably just ask a couple, then maybe go around, and then I'll come back to some, because I had a bunch, and then as you guys were talking, I had a few more. So I guess my first question is, this decision to close these two schools, was that I'm not sure how to answer this. Was that the kind of foreseen where it was going to be from the get-go, or was there a time when there were different scenarios presented to the committee where they kind of weighed one school versus another? Say, okay, maybe it's Desert Sun and Black Mountain. What does that look like, and how does that do? And we start comparing those numbers. And then you come up with those numbers and then put it against what we have here now. Was a scenario like that taken into account, or did we kind of have this, in mind?
Ms. Fortin, or Member Fortney, thank you for that question. So kind of the way we work through our different meetings, number one is we just talked about each school individually. What do we know about enrollment, open enrollment, programs at the school, especially programs, location. We looked at all those factors for each school. And then we looked at projections. And then what I tasked the group with is they kind of had worksheets where we said, okay, pick a school that you think, based on if we were to close it, it wouldn't impact losing open enrollment, it wouldn't impact it, we would assume those families would stay within the district. Close that school. Where would you move those kids to? Why would you move those kids to that school? Do they fit within that school as we looked at the numbers? So they were given all of this data. And so as they kind of continued work through kind of working different scenarios, different puzzles, is when DSA and Lone Mountain were identified, specifically enrollment, open enrollment, and then kind of geographic location, knowing Black Mountain and Horseshoe Trails are kind of the north and south end, and they are the ones that attract some of the most open enrollment, have very popular programs, and then Desert Willow with their Spanish immersion program that is still very popular, and knowing that's a hard program to split and a costly program to split. So they were kind of given all the information and then kind of worked the different pieces of the puzzle to kind of then identify. And then that's when the conversation regarding Sonoran Trails kind of came up, and we started kind of going down that route and saying, yeah, we do think this is, it not only creates a little bit more space at the remaining elementary schools, but really this is best for kids. So okay. They came to that decision.
Okay. And then, okay, perfect. Let me just ask you one quick question that was just a kind of numbers thing, and then I'll let some other folks do it. At Desert Willow, we have a number, the 23-24 population was 399. And then we said now, after the move, so we're going to get half of those Lone Mountain kids coming to Desert Willow, it was 384. That's less, so I'm not sure why that is. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that is going to be, remember, we're losing that's the first enrollment number was K6. We're now down to K5 students. Okay. And then depending on how large that 6th grade and 5th grade population is, how small or large that kindergarten population is, we just simply, if there's 30 kids in kindergarten this year, we're predicting there's 30 next year. If you're losing 60 6th graders, you have a net loss already of 30 plus the 60, kind of, if you will.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. Somebody else.
I have a couple questions. Back to the enrollment one, it does, on the projections, it did have Desert Sun had an increase in 2033. Do you know why?
From the demographer
right
reports, as you look at Desert
100
Sun
students.
potentially going to 374, that's the assumption of their the one zoned area that does have potential for growth coming out of Rio Verde. Again, given birth rates, economy, large houses that are usually built out there, that's just kind of a prediction there. So
Okay, because Rio Verde gets fed.
Yeah, it goes to
feeds Desert
DSA.
Sun.
Yeah.
Okay. For the building capacities, for that square footage, how is that calculated? Is it the entire square footage? Because if you're doing whole square footage, like of a home, it's going to include closets, which obviously aren't classrooms, or is it just strictly classrooms, and then the capacity is calculated that way?
Yeah. And so, when the facility management group came through, they looked at specifically what is designated by the school facilities division as a classroom, and making sure that we're solely looking at what our classrooms, what they sometimes think is a classroom and what we actually think is a classroom can be different things. So this is more on what we typically use for a classroom. Currently, some of these classrooms are being used for a PTO room, a staff lounge, a collaborative space, an assessment center, things like that. So these are truly classrooms where you could fit 30 desks in there.
And they walk the campus.
And they walk the classroom and assess. They did come through and assess all of our elementary buildings.
And are these their numbers then, or our numbers?
These are their numbers.
These are
Yeah.
their numbers. Okay. And then Sonoran Trails, for their estimated projection, if we moved everybody over, was 951 students. I know as a parent, it's always like that campus seems so large. Do we have the number of what that total was in the past? I know it has had larger students than it has today. Just to make the
We'll
public
ask
aware.
the past principal.
No, 100%. The largest Sonoran Trails was during my 12 years there as principal, we had 1,150 kids. SFD said, well, it was SFB at the time, said we could hold more than that. That would have included trading out our teacher lounges, all sorts of spaces that I didn't feel we had as much space as they had. 1150 was a maximum. That was pretty big at that point in time. And remember, again, I'm going to stay positive. 951 is assuming all those things. Dr. Pletnick actually assumes a 12.5% potential loss. That 951 does not include any loss. It is certainly my hope that 951 students would be there for sure. And I am very confident that school could handle 951. Projecting, looking at the current numbers below that, that would actually be the biggest. If we held on to everybody every year moving forward, it would continue to get smaller and smaller from that 950 that first year.
Okay. Thank you.
Remember, Walker, another thing that you just prompt my memory that we had talked about is, typically when students transition 6th to 7th grade, then 8th to 9th, that's where we see the biggest loss of students. One of the things that we hope is a positive through this is retention of students, because not many students go from 5th grade to 6th grade in another district or in a private school. So knowing that they're coming to Sonoran Trails, one of the things we hope is that them becoming ingrained in the Sonoran Trails culture for that year they have to be there before they go to a private junior high, let's say, they enjoy it, they want to stay there. So we hope that leads to a retention impact as well.
Okay, thank you. And 200 less than what you've had seems not so bad. On the weighted ADM, that includes ESS or ESS students? Does it also include like free and reduced lunch? Is that Title I for those higher numbers? What is all in that?
So it's any grouping in our what's called B. So our B weightings. So if we look at our report that we get for our funding and what most schools use for the equalization, which we receive 0 for, that would include our ELL population. That would include K3. It also, when our Move On One Reading comes in, it includes our funding for our Move On One Reading, and it also includes our special ed funding within that. So yes.
Okay. And then just one other thing I did want to say that I appreciated ECS being thought for 6th graders. I think even if we can do with, it's been a concern of mine with my own daughter moving up to middle school. she's not one that can stay home alone. She is a sixth grader that takes advantage of the Bobcat Club. So I think having those programs for not necessarily by age, but needs of our students is probably important. So I appreciate the team looking into that. That's it for now.
So going to the net loss, can you bring back up that slide? I think it was,
That one.
keep going. There was the other fun one, this one right here. When you're talking about taking no action or you're playing with the numbers up there, are you factoring in Cactus and Sonoran into those numbers? Or is that just solely elementary?
No, that's solely elementary. When we're looking at Sonoran Trails and Cactus, I have those numbers in front of me that I can provide to you. When we're looking at weighted ADM, Sonoran Trails is just over $3.9 million. Their expenditures were just under $3.1 million. So they're actually in a positive of about $828,000 based upon the same formula. And then when we look at Cactus Shadows, we're about $9.7 million with the weighted ADM. And their expenditures are almost $7.3 million, so they have about $2.4 million that they are in the positive for. So as you can see, if you're looking at that pie chart and how our dollars get moved around, definitely our middle school and our high school are supporting us at that point. And if you think about it, it makes sense when we talked about economy of scale, because if you look at the class size in the high school, it's a lot bigger. So again, the less we're going to spend in that 1,000 compared to the elementary school, when the ratio is 1 to 32 versus 1 to 22. So if you wanted the secondary numbers, there you go.
Thank you. On the was it TEI? Mm-hmm. I'm assuming we can play with that number, right? It can go up?
It can go up, yeah. The more experienced our teachers are, the more experienced teachers we have, the higher number that can go up.
I'll say it maximizes that 15 years. After that, that's
at
the same level.
So there's a cap, is what you're saying?
Yeah, there's a cap from the team.
What's the cap on that number?
15 years. So, and I can give you those numbers from my coordinators.
Yeah, no, good. Can you just pull it up real quick?
At the 1.0126.
Yeah. So what's that real? Yep, right there. Yep,
right there.
Yep, there.
There.
What can you make that number?
I would have to find out for you where it goes up to.
Correct. What's the cap?
Yeah, I would have
I
to
mean, it's a
find
fun
out.
game to play, right?
Yeah. But I don't have an answer for you on what
Okay.
the absolute cap, whether it be 1.5, 1.7, whatever it happens to be.
Okay.
I would have to find out if anybody's ever hit that.
But we do, just so you know, our department, we input all that information every single year. So again, after 15 years, a 15-year teacher is the same value as a 20-year teacher, 25-year teacher. So,
Right. It's a cap, but to get the number,
So it would have to
Maximizing
find with the formula. what the
10-year
cap would be.
retention, etc. Okay. Other question I have is, I mean, kind of open Pandora's box with this one. 2 points. If we're looking at this and we're going down this road, did we look at, again, if we're looking at maximizing long-term range, because that's kind of what we have to do here, what about the district office? Is there opportunities, or did we evaluate all of our facilities to find any turnover? Because again, I like the fact that you guys are trying to say, hey, we've put our finger in the dam enough. We're trying to get long-term range to kind of sustain. Did we look at every option, opportunity, and facility and property to see if there's some creative options through this process?
Well, and I will say what we have been focusing on in all of our departments, in the departments that I oversee, for example, facilities. We've found creative ways to, again, we had open positions, but instead of opening positions, we recreated new positions that we were able to use more efficiently rather than hiring new people. So we've started that process of streamlining at all levels. And That includes also our technology department and who we've had in our technology department. If you look at our overall administrative costs, I'm actually dealing with the Auditor General right now for our updated numbers. You can see where we compare to other school districts by going to the Auditor General site. Now, it's based upon last year's numbers, but the new report should be up in January. But our administrative costs, again, when we look at that, it's anything that takes in consideration, yes, our administrators, but also the front office staff and so forth. But we are comparable as they go high, medium, low, comparable on their chart. We are comparable to other districts. And we've actually seen a reduction from fiscal year 23 to 24, which I wasn't around for that portion of it. But administrative FTE, there was a reduction in administrative FTE during that time period.
And Member Moore, I'd just like to point out that the facilities focus group, that wasn't the task that they were given. However, having said that, as Dr. Pletnick said, we are constantly looking at where we can do better, be more lean. I would respectfully assert you can only cut off so much meat from the bone. And at this point, we're pretty bony. We're down a couple positions. Dr. Pletnick mentioned in his district, or on his side of the district. I know Dr. Jensen is down a position, both ESS and in the Ed Services Department, and that both includes clerical and director level positions. So we are cutting, and we are doing everything we can to keep the cuts away from the classrooms. And the Band-Aids are out, and the time is to do something that will set us up for success for our kids and our staff and our district for the future moving forward.
Thank you.
I just am curious, back to slide 11, and congratulations to them, but what is Black Mountain and Horseshoe Trails doing so well that they have such a high attraction outside of, with open enrollment and outside the district? I mean, that's very impressive, so congratulations.
Yeah, Member Ulmer, thank you for the question. Number one, we lose the most students to Paradise Valley in terms of kids going here to open enroll there. We gain the most from Deer Valley, and it's typically that area right down Carefree Highway that comes then. The school is Black Mountain. That's the closest elementary school, and then Sonoran Trails and Cactus Shadows High School is where we get our biggest enrollment from is Deer Valley. That was one of the factors, and Dr. Hendrickson, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of that northern and southern boundary, Horseshoe Trails gets most of their open enrollment from PV as well, that's just south of our district. That also happens to be, if you look at long-term planning for the area, any affordable housing that's coming to our area is coming off of that Cave Creek and highway, and I'm forgetting the name of the highway that cuts across there. But that's where Sonoran Desert Parkway, thank you. That's where some new affordable housing is coming, where actually the closest elementary school right now to that area is Horseshoe Trails. The closest middle school is Sonoran Trails, although those areas are technically PV. That again was, I believe, part of the group's recommendation, knowing that demographer had predicted some movement there, that we have the potential to go in and under a business model perhaps advertise and make sure they know that the closest schools to them are that southern border.
The old saying, location, location, location.
Yeah, okay.
And I will say they're just awesome schools as well, so that's why they have great principals and great staffs like all of our 5 schools do.
Agreed. I hear that all the time, and I didn't want to take anything away from anybody else, but I definitely wanted to acknowledge that because that's awesome. Just curious, and I might have misheard this, but did I hear that the ESA program has a larger impact on Cave Creek?
Yeah, so when we look at, and Dr. Pletnick can talk to it a little bit more, when you look at the ratio of our enrollment to the number of students taking it comparative to districts, much larger, a lot of it has to do with a more affluent area. And so these families know that they can get their kids to the sites that they want to get them to. They have the ability to do that. And so communities like us tend to take more advantage of it.
And Mr. Doles, I forget exactly what the rate was called, but we were with one of the companies we financially work with, and it's a 50%. Do you remember what
Yeah, I don't remember what it's called, but we were at Applied Economics, and again,
Yeah.
they were talking about ESAs, and they estimate overall in the state that it's about a 50% ratio of students who were already in private school, never have come to public school that take ESAs, and 50% that have moved from public schools to take it. However, they did acknowledge that in wealthier areas, that percentage is much higher because, again, the parents have the means, they have the awareness. I mean, at this point in time, if you're getting ESAs right now and you don't tend to use them through your high school career, you're actually having a college savings plan because that money stays with you and you get to help fund education after high school as well. So that tends to be more applicable to higher affluent areas.
I got a few more. Well, first, I was remiss, I wanted to say this before. The families that we have heard from Lone Mountain, the emails that we've gotten, we appreciate that. We hear you. We feel what you're going through, and we empathize. This is a tough decision, like President Busby said. This is not something we take lightly, and we know that if we were doing this to Black Mountain or Desert Willow, we would get the exact same emails about how amazing that school is and how much the kids love it at those schools too. So we feel that. So I do appreciate you guys sharing your stories. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Other questions that I had are kind of semi-related because they are human type things. We're closing these schools potentially. We are moving people around. What are we talking about in terms of letting our staff go as far as RIFs go? What are the anticipated numbers for certified, classified, or administrative? Do we have those numbers yet?
I do have some preliminary numbers, and so as we look at kind of just case 6 teachers, if I'm looking at that with the number of positions we would need, we are looking at a surplus of roughly 4 to 5 teachers. However, that's case 6 teachers, and then if I add in resource and specials, I want to say it's 12 teachers. But I will say in the 22-23 school year, we hired 36 elementary teachers. The 23-24 school year was about 27-28 teachers. Last year we hired about 19 teachers. So through natural attrition, I do not anticipate that we would have to go through a RIF process. We think that we will capture these through the normal attrition that occurs. However, we will be communicating with our staff to let us know as soon as possible if they're going to be returning, if they're going to be kind of seeking employment elsewhere, so we can know what positions are open. And then for our support staff, working with those support staff, one of the things I've already worked with Dr. Jensen is any positions for classified staff that come open, not filling those positions unless we have to. So those are positions that are available for people that can be moved into that, making sure we're finding like positions there. And so those are all things that are being looked at and taking great care and making sure we're taking care of all individuals.
And is there a plan on how that is going to look if we do have to RIF them? Where I kind of went through, it wasn't a school closure, but back in 2009, we had to go through this thing where we had to let several people go. And luckily, I had just enough seniority that I had to move instead of losing my job, but several teachers did. And it seemed like it was strictly seniority that was the determining factor. Is that usually what it is going to be, or is there other factors that go into it?
Yeah, so when you're talking about RIF reduction in force, it's no longer legal for seniority to be a factor in that. And so you have to look at a menu of options, including teacher performance, certification, additional certification, advanced degrees. And then for the transfer process, current policy says that transfer is based off seniority, but then the principal at that school needs to have an opportunity to make sure that that individual is a good fit for them, but seniority plays a higher factor there. Not next week, the week after, I'm going to be meeting with our IBN team, and so those are 2 conversations we're going to be having with our classified and our certified staff, is reviewing current RIF process, reviewing current transfer process. Does that continue to meet our needs? If not, make those tweaks to bring those to the governing board to change those policies.
And would teachers like have to like interview if there were several for like wanting to be at this school doing this grade?
Yeah, so they would have to go through that process. And again, one of the things that would be my commitment to teachers to say, hey, I'm only worried about teaching first grade, and that's your first choice. Let's find you a first grade wherever that is. Or, hey, I'm flexible with any grade level, but I really want to be at Horseshoe Trails. And so kind of taking that in consideration and kind of giving them first, second, third choice if we can.
Okay, thanks.
One question kind of came to mind. Right now, Lone Mountain is considered a STEAM school. Closing that school would mean the population is divided roughly between two other schools.
Correct.
What would happen with that program? I know you had mentioned it would, closing a school or schools would potentially create the opportunity to expand offerings. So would that mean STEAM would become possibly part of the other three
Yeah.
elementary schools?
Absolutely. The one great thing I think about a program like STEAM is that that is a program that can be integrated at any school, even supplementing a specialty program that's already there. Something that can be integrated in the daily teaching, not just being a separate specials class. And so a little back history on the Lone Mountain. Unfortunately last year we did have to cut the STEAM position simply because of enrollment and funding. And so we've seen a reduction of that. It is our hope with this consolidation that we are able to infuse STEAM back into the daily instruction, the daily teaching of students, having the resources at all three sites. That's something that's very capable and probably the easiest to replicate at all sites because Desert Willow, you need a Spanish immersion teacher to teach Spanish. Those are hard to find. At Black Mountain, you need dance teachers, you need choir teachers, things like that, theater teachers. Hard to replicate. STEAM is a program that we feel confident is something that can be replicated, integrated at each site, and not as expensive as a cost as some of the other specialty programs.
And I just want to follow up that I do want to congratulate and commend because the Lone Mountain staff has really taken what was a once-a-week elective for STEAM and really worked to infuse that into daily things. And I think as that staff spreads out a potential legacy and ongoing credit to Lone Mountain, and that would be bringing that STEAM and that energy and that program throughout the district.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much every email from parents. So in that transition plan too, I mean, I know you said not dividing neighbors. You came up with some pretty good things. What's the assurance to the parents though? Because there's a lot of uncertainty in that regard now that we're going down this path of breaking up that community known as Lone Mountain. It was interesting to see how many emails came just solely for Lone Mountain. So that it speaks to the staff, the families, the students, the community of that school. So how do we somehow, in a creative manner, bridge that gap or at least create some level of assurance? Because if not, I can assume we hope to hold 12.5, but we're always rolling dice at this point.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Well, and Member Moore, one thing I'd just like to point out already is in the introduction I talked about this will take our community, that it cannot just be this cabinet, it cannot just be this board, it will take this community to do that. One of the things that I was very grateful for is a recent meeting with our PTO groups where all the PTOs were present. And those parent groups are already talking about how can we bring each other, wherever who's going where, how can we participate and actually bring families into our community and unite those things? Again, if you're saying, what are we going to do as the 4 cabinet members and the 25 leaders in the district and even then the teachers and all of that, it's going to take the village of Cave Creek to do this and do it well. And I have no doubt in my mind that this community and this group can actually do that and bring those people in and give those kids a new home, give those parents a new home that makes them feel comfortable, supported, and again, shows what a great place it is to be in Cave Creek.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I got a couple more.
Okay.
We were talking somewhere in here. Just wanted to clarify something real quick first. If, say, the folks from Lone Mountain are pegged to go to Black Mountain, but they don't want to go there, they want to go to Horseshoe Trails, they can open enrollment, they'll get first dibs on that. Do they get transportation for that then too, or do they have to do that on their own?
I'm going to have Dr. Pletnick add in a little bit, but so currently we would have to look at the transportation needs and the abilities. Currently, we do not transport any student to a school outside of their what they're zoned for, and then there's certain requirements, from my understanding, as far as what they're zoning things. So, again, could we do it possibly? But then, does that increase our expenses as a result? Now, that's a factor we got to look at.
There are definitely ideas we can explore, and Ms. Nelson, who is the transportation director, and I have spoken about it. And even for some of our current school, what would be referred to as like community stops, where a parent can drop off at certain sites to go to certain schools. So there's creative pieces we can look into, which we can even may, and especially in the far reaches of our district, may help. So there are some creative ways we can look at transportation, certainly.
Okay, thanks. Last thing was about the potential salary increases. Can we get a little bit more away from that potential word and get into like what are we talking about here, and how much are we thinking that is, and can we like make sure that these, some of these cost savings will definitely be directed to the teachers?
Yeah, I will say some of the preliminary conversations and what Mr. Dolezal has tasked myself and Dr. Pletnick with is what are ways that we can find ways come contract season this year to add X amounts. A little bit of a risk. We don't know if we're going to lose students. We hope we're not. We're going to take every measure we can. We think there's going to be some actualized savings, but saying we're gonna whatever carry forward or whatever pocket of money, let's guarantee this for teachers for next year. So that's something that Mr. Dolezal has already tasked us with as a priority from him and from cabinet as well.
And Dr. Hendrickson and Mr. Fortney, just to be clear, that would be something that actually goes on the base. There has not been anything added to the base in a long time. I can't remember. It's kind of been one-time payment. So along with that, what I've tasked him with is also tasked to let's actually put it on the base, not just this extra thing that comes. So it's kind of guaranteed moving forward. Rough estimates, just so you have it, a 1% increase for certified, non-administrative, and classified is about $290,000. So just to give you an idea.
And then to kind of expand on that, Member Fortney, so part of the conversation in our IBN committee that we'll be getting back together in December is kind of what is the process and what would it look like when we do an analysis in December saying this was the savings. How do we then take that and what percentage of that is going either into the base or a one-time stipend for this year until we can kind of get phase 2 going and seeing where we have options for increasing our revenue streams that would then add additional compensation. So our IBN team will be having those conversations as well to get their input.
Anything else? Anybody else?
I think I have just one closing statement. Can you go to the cost savings screen? I think yeah.
Keep going.
There you go.
That one or that one?
Or the next
Let's do,
one.
yeah, this one's perfect. I think it's really hard and becomes super emotional thinking of closing 2 campuses, and there's obviously efficiencies. But when you see this number of $760,000, and probably most houses around those areas are at least double that. And I mean, I've been on this board twice. We've tried to go for a bond and override, and I think it's very disheartening that the community hasn't come behind it, and this is kind of where we are today. Just doesn't seem like enough. And I know there's potential revenue sources from there, but I think that's really hard to see.
Yeah.
Well, and again, remember this is conservative. In talking to other districts that have closed schools, they've actually realized higher gains now. And again, we're looking at this being approximately for 1 year, but if you begin taking it out second, third, fourth year, it does become a substantial amount of money. And again, I want to stress, and again, it's so hard to quantify and put this into dollars and take out any kind of emotion out of it. But again, that cost savings is, you said it looks like a house in this area. But again,
Starting house,
sorry. It again, if it's more than that, and then year after year, again, we're looking at, and especially with talking about our teachers and putting them in the right spot. I mean, there's a lot we can take advantage of for our staff. There's a lot with the programming we can take advantage of for our students as well. When we right size, and it's tough to swallow and to see now, but we are definitely, we've kicked the can down the road, and that's the tough part.
In a comparison of a $69,000 is a big difference, but yeah.
Anybody else?
I just want to say thanks for putting this presentation together. It's actually probably one of the best presentations I've seen thus far. So thank you guys for taking the time and putting the detail in and the work in, because at this point in time, all information is needed.
Absolutely.
I want to, again, reiterate the appreciation for all the work that everybody put into this, the time, the effort, the dedication. I know this is a very emotional topic. I know. And it isn't anything that we take lightly, but I would like to say that, everybody that's here, whether here or out there, we are a very resilient district. And there's a lot of support. This is a family. And however this plays out, I encourage everybody to embrace our resilience and what's made Cave Creek, because any tough situation that you face, you get through it with the help of those close to you. And this district has unbelievable potential. I wouldn't be on this board for as long as I have been here if I didn't believe in what we can accomplish together in this district. So with that said, item 6, adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned, and it is 7:45.